Well, hey Gundam fans, welcome to another episode of Gundam Explained. For this video, we're actually continuing to look at these stories that have been going on during the 1-year war, and a lot of these are based on video games, and so that's really what I'm covering right now. In fact, this one is called Missing Link, and it was on the PS3, although it actually sort of integrates earlier stories, so I guess it is kind of the missing link that links everything together. But before we get started, if you haven't, please subscribe, and as you watch this video, if you think it's cool, give it a like. So Missing Link is a game on the PS3, and there's actually a manga adaptation for it as well. Now, I haven't been able to try this, although from what I've heard from the community here at Gundam Explained, that the import of this can play fine on any region PS3, so I really need to try it out. I did, just for testing purposes, try it out on an emulator, and it did work, but it just wasn't good enough for me to want to really spend my time with it. Now, it's very interesting, even though it has its Missing Link story, it also incorporates stories from the previous games, like Zionic Front, Rise from the Ashes, and Cross Dimension 0079. So, not only does it incorporate, or not only does it have those remade as a third-person game within side stories, but the story itself of Missing Link includes some mobile suits and characters from those other side stories, so it kind of like combines them together. Now, it's gotten very confusing, and I even feel I haven't fully grasped it yet, but we're going to just focus on what's in Missing Link. Now, here is some gameplay. Now, from this is YouTuber Gundam Fan 520. Seems like someone that would be a friend of mine, right? But what we're seeing is how the combat looks. It's almost very similar to like Gundam Battle Operation 2, which it's made by the same studio. And what I played, I had fun with it. It didn't seem too difficult in terms of freedom of combat. It does focus kind of on locking on to move around, but it's very action oriented in it because that's really cool. And the graphics are nice. Again, and this is what's used for the other side stories that were games like on Dreamcast and PS2. Now, what we're seeing with this gameplay of Missing Link and what we're going to get into the story is it follows the slave Wraiths. Now, this is a team of the Federations, like a special operations group that kind of does these special combat missions. And they are mainly made up of ex-convicts, or convicts, actually, current convicts, or other people within the Federation that I guess that Federation has deemed not to be upstanding citizens, even if it seems like the Federation is pretty harsh on them. So yeah, here's the slave Wraith. Awesome looking emblem here. I haven't even looked it up, but I'm sure GBO2 probably has the emblem that you can use to attach. But I mean, that just looks awesome. And you kind of saw, we were looking at the mobile suits, how they're kind of gray. They had a gray color scheme to it, which looks really cool. Okay, so some of the members: Travis Kirkland, Fred Reber, nicknamed Ripper, Marvin Harriot, Edward Lee, Doris Brand. But really, I think the focus is mainly on Travis Kirkland and Fred Reber. So listen to the history. Members of the Slave Wraith were all criminals who were sentenced to death, but possessed exceptional abilities in certain fields. And so we keep hearing about this member named Grave, and not really a member. He's actually just part of the Federation that was in charge of this unit, but also seemed to have a background in some other nefarious things that were going on, probably related to manipulating new types and their abilities, cyber new types. The Augustus base, where some new type labs were located, is also central here, and it picks up on like Blue Destiny, where we had that what was it called, the exam system, and in here we have something called the Hades system, which I think it piggybacks off that. But what's really interesting about this is, and we'll see this with the Zeon side in this Missing Link story, is both the Federation and Zeon Special Forces units, you'll see they kind of switch sides, I think because of the way they're being treated by the respective worlds, the Federation, Zeon. They don't have like a longing respect for any side, like a loyalty, because of the way they're being treated. They're being treated as criminals, and they could be, depending on what you deem what they've done is wrong or not, but then just thrown into these missions. And so I think that opens up the potential for defecting, for maybe questioning what is going on. And we're going to see a lot of that takes place here. So on the Principality of Zeon's side, they had the Marcosius that had Vincent, Gleissner, Doug Schneid, and a bunch of these other characters here. Let's see. This one that's considered others is a Croce, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And we'll kind of get into that later. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring up now, this is from when we're looking at the rest of the cast from this game. Again, this is the side stories Missing Link. So while we're not focusing on the other stories, this is primarily your Missing Link. We'll see some crossover like Yu Kojima, who we know from Blue Destiny. We've got the White Dingo team, Thoroughbred. So you can see there's characters from the Missing Link game from the other stories, and some characters that cross over. There's even a mission with Yu Kojima in it, and even the Pixy Gundam shows up, and the Blue Destiny Unit 3. Transport aircraft that we see from 0079. There's a version in 8th MS Team. Here, they've got a special version. I kind of like that they're keeping consistency with the type of machinery that's used. All right, Travis Kirkland. So he has a pretty interesting history. So while he had duties to work with the Federation during the 1-year war, his family was in Side 3, which was considered a Zeon colony. Now, it was prohibited to communicate unofficially with Zeon colonies, and that could actually mark you for death within the Federation. He was just trying to reach out to his family, and it was that caused him to be considered a criminal, that he was going to be put to death, which is pretty drastic, but that's the length the Federation would go. And then something else I wondered recently, too, is with the massive population, is there a degree of morals or ethics that are then not shared with a smaller population? I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about there, where you're willing to put people to death easily in these scenarios if they're not in line. There's just so many people that it's very easy for people to get out of line, and you kind of have to set that expectation. So one of the other members during Missing Link that's on the Zeon side is this Vincent Gleissner, and he happens to be the son of Travis. So that's kind of a very interesting dynamic that's going on, and it kind of leads to members switching sides. And it's because what we're seeing with the extremity to which people are treated for certain activities, even if they meant no wrongdoing, it's very easy for someone to not want to be loyal to one side, or to just take matters into their own hands where they know it's the best thing. And I think when we look at Zeon and Federation, typically it's very easy for us to be Federation good guys, Zeon bad guys. From a wide view, it might seem like that. But when we tend to zoom in individually on what people are going through, it's really hard to discern that at that level. And I think that's why something like 0080 War in the Pocket works so well. So here is the RX-80 PR2 Pale Rider Calvary, piloted by Travis Kirkland. Very cool unit here. We're seeing a Gundam mixed with a GM, but some other things that make it a little more current and modern. There's some of that, what is it, the 04, 05, maybe even Mark II thrown in there, or things that we'd see from the Alex. Almost even, if I'm not mistaken, like a Zeta Gundam-like. Very minimal, though. But, I mean, it's just, it really encompasses the best of a lot of mobile suit design from the side of the Federation. Now, this is a Unit 2, so keep in mind there is a normal unit, the Pale Rider. This one has the Hades system, and this one is piloted by that pilot Chloe, who we'll get into shortly. So what's cool about the Pale Rider is the number of weapons it has, from Vulcan Gun, Beam Saber, Beam Javelin, we're kind of familiar with, but then there's a composite weapon, the Shekinah. The composite weapon, Shekinah, combines 3 different weapons into one piece of equipment: a giant Gatling gun, a mega beam launcher, and a micro missile launcher. With this weapon's versatility, the Pale Rider Cavalry can handle various combat situations, from close range engagements that commands high mobility to long range shelling. It really seems like just the all-in-one awesome unit. So this is when Hades comes into play here. So the acronym is Hyper Animosity Detect Estimate System. So this controversial system was created by a top secret research laboratory in Augusta based on data and samples of the exam system. So we're familiar with the Augusta base, where they did some new type or cyber new type research from Blue Destiny. Like the system used by the original Pale Rider, activation of the Hades improves the unit's performance. However, the Pale Rider Cavalry's Hades has a limiter to limit its operating time and is tuned down to suit normal pilots, but it still places a heavy burden on the pilot's body. So again, it affects the pilot, and we've seen that with the previous missions or these side stories during the 1 Year War where they're doing these experiments. Sometimes it affects people in a negative way. Okay, so during the attack on Solomon, the Pale Rider Cavalry was there, and this is where we hear about this character Grave. And again, I've done as much research as I could on this Grave character. If anyone has any information, if you could please put it in the comments. I want to maybe do some more research into this character, because he seemed to be the one that was doing all these experimental things, and he tend to push people away from being loyal to him. But this is where the Pale Rider was, and it was stolen by Rogue Slave Wraith team and piloted by Travis Kirkland. So with the other Pale Rider, the one piloted by Chloe, the interesting thing here is to withstand the high Gs from the mobile suit's heightened performance and enhanced coordination with the Hades, the pilot is mentally and physically enhanced through drugs and inhumane bodily modifications. It's very interesting. And this even further makes me think of the Spartan program in Halo. There is a Spartan GM, in Gundam, and that's kind of where the idea for the Spartan Mark, I forget what it was called, was. And they also had the humans inside that were modified through drugs and bodily modifications. Okay, so let's look at this pilot, Chloe Croce, if that's how you pronounce it. Originally a gentle and innocent girl, Chloe was turned into a merciless killing machine by the enhancement procedures she underwent, which dulled her mind and slowly made her lose her memories. She was age 15 in 0079, and so remember that a lot of this takes place at the end of the 1 Year War. That would be 79, and she even shows up again at 90, and that's she was 25 at that time. So it's very young. I mean, your life has changed. This is very similar to the storylines we see from Zeta and Double Zeta, or the Puru clones also, how they're enhanced to be cyber new types. So it really follows that formula. So very interesting. According to the manga adaptation, The Missing Link, which has some more story elements, Chloe lost her parents and her home during Operation British. That was, during the 1 Year War. She was found by Grave, a mysterious EFF official, and became the test subject for the Pale Rider project. So again, Grave is shown up, and within the wiki, I'm not seeing it linked to him. Yeah, page does not exist, as you can see with the highlight there. So I'm really curious to see if there's more information on Grave other than being a scientist in the Augusta base that is wanting to perform these experiments to enhance the experimental mobile suits. So get this, during the Battle of Jaburo, that was a pivotal battle that's in 0079, Grave ordered Chloe to wipe out the Slave Wraith team, which was directed to Jaburo under the pretense of protecting the base using the Pale Rider. So, very interesting, because not only was the Slave Wraith team sent there maybe to be wiped out, but the Zeon's Marcosius team, who we'll get into here shortly, was there as well. So they were involved in that situation. So you can kind of see where these pilots, whether Federation or Zeon, start to see the corruption on their personal level within the war. Not just the high level of, between Federation and Zeon wanting to spend money or make money by having all these weapons developed so you can keep war going. But once you get down to the personal level, you can see specific motivations carried out in order for that agenda to play out. And these people are caught up in it, and that's what has them make their decisions. Now, in 0090, Neo Zeon further enhanced the Pale Rider into the AMX 018 Hades Toad Shredder. So that thing looks sick. I mean, if you could take a look at it here, It takes the elements that we're familiar with, but it kind of enhances it a bit. I kind of like how that the chest armor, even though it is very remnant of Federation, it sticks out just a bit more to kind of give it more of that Zeon look, especially when we look at, you know, the feet, for instance, and some of the other leg design. It's almost like combining Federation and Neo Zeon, and it just looks awesome. All right, so going back to Travis, another mobile suit he piloted is RX-79 Ground, SW Slave Wraith. So I guess SW is Slave Wraith. But very cool to see this because this is a RX-79 Ground Gundam we're kind of familiar with, but it's kind of cool to see you know, the way it looks, how it's specified for the Slave Wraith team that Travis uses. And it was acquired by the Slave Wraith unit due to the forgery of documents. So even, you know, lends to a little more corruption that was occurring. Maybe, you know, that was due to them wanting to be able to have wanting them to have a high-performing mobile suit during this time when a lot of the operations carried out by the Federation were to take some of these criminals or people that they didn't really value and kind of throw them out there in mobile suits they didn't really value. Just like in MS Igloo, when we see young, almost kid pilots just piloting the ball or the pod out during the 1 Year War. All right, so another member of the Slave Wraith is Fred Reber, nicknamed Ripper. And here we can see a picture of him in 0079, but this is another example of the story continuing. 0096, we might be familiar with that from the Unicorn era. He is then part of the Zeon remnants, and he gets the Ifrit mobile suit, and it's actually from someone from the Marcosius Zeon team, Doug Schneid, who we'll get into here in a little bit. One thing to note with Fred Reber is he piloted the Gundam Pixy. Now, if we're familiar, that's from the Cross Dimension 0079 story, but he happens to have it also during this timeline, but unknown if it's another unit or it was a salvaged and repaired unit. But again, this is that crossover we're seeing in this Missing Link story where we're seeing, instead of brand new units being developed, they seem to be repurposed or reused Gundam units that were introduced previously. And here's the look of the Pixy Slave Wraith version. Now, really, if we're going to look at the normal one, how it looks, you know, it's kind of the same look, even though this is like an older rendition of it. But it had that heart with the arrow in it on the shoulder. But we can kind of see that's missing, but it still has that same look. And a lot of times I think the Gundam Pixy is easy to be able to recognize due to its look, even though it almost looks like a typical Gundam. There's some variations within it and kind of the scale of it to kind of be able to differentiate it. And another thing to note too is another topic I'll get into later is from Battle Operation Code Fairy is there is another Pixy there that's piloted by Lilith Aiden. And again, we don't know if it's a new one or a resalvaged one, etc. So here's something that's very interesting. This character, Vincent Gleissner, again, this is kind of a tragic story, but he is the son of Travis, who we were just talking about. We know Travis got in trouble with the Federation because he was trying to contact Side 3, the Side 3 colony, because his family was there, right? So on the flip side of that, the mother of Vincent Gleissner was then in trouble with Zeon because it seemed like she was trying to communicate with the Federation. So because of that, he got taken away and he started training with Zeon and went and joined the Marcosius Corps. So you can kind of see how interesting it is with the dynamics between the characters because they are caught up in this war, even though it's not really their fault. But then they are having to fight and then from there make decisions that they think is best for them. So when he runs across the Pale Rider with the pilot Chloe, he understands her background and starts, you know, feeling bad for her. So he joins to help her out, and they fight together with Ayug and the Neo Zeon army. So it's very cool to see how their story has continued past the 1 Year War, but throughout the conflicts that have occurred since then. So some interesting things to kind of resolve this side of the story. So there was a conflict that occurred, you know, later on around 90 or so, 0090, and Vincent Vincent's father, Travis, who we learned of earlier, was searching for Vincent and found him. And so they worked together to save Chloe. And after the battle, all 4 pilots were finally able to resolve their respective conflicts with each other and left the battlefield to live a relatively peaceful life together. Chloe settled down with Vincent, eventually giving birth to his child. So not that we get this all the time, but here's like a happy ending for the story between these main characters. Now, Doug Schneid is another pivotal character in the Missing Link story. He was the commander of that Marcosius MS regiment. But what's interesting is he met Fred Reber, who was with the EFF, and they sort of respected each other. In fact, they even swapped mobile suits in order to allow Fred to escape. So that's how Fred got the Ifrit, and for some time, Doug Schneid was in the Gundam Pixy. And so Doug Schneid does end up dying during that early part, during the 1 Year War. And part of what he did, though, was good in trying to help Reber escape. Now, and what I'm getting to conclude here, when we see what these characters are going through from the 1 Year War forward, is there's sort of a faction of individuals that understand, all in all, that this war is bad and should not be happening. And we can see at a personal level how these people are being affected because no one is valuing them, who they are, to make sure they are successful. Either on the Zeon side or the Federation side, they are being used. But because these are high-performing pilots, they are able to kind of rise above and stand for themselves, trying to do the right thing. And it really does make the Federation and the Zeon look bad. All right, now that is it so far for the story of Missing Link. I think there's a lot of details. The manga covers some more. And again, as I mentioned, there's more future stories that occurred during the Third Neo-Zeon War. And so I might in the future want to touch on that a bit more. But there's kind of an overview of where we're seeing previous mobile suits from the side stories being reintroduced and being used. But we also see some new ones in a way based on the slave Wraith team, and really the Slave Wraiths and Pale Riders. It looks awesome. Those are just awesome additions in general to the mobile suits in the UC universe. Also, with that Hades system, even though it is just another exam system, but I think it makes sense that within the Federation, within the weapons division, we see development of these kind of immoral, unethical experiments that were occurring, and we have these individuals that were able to recognize that and stand up against it. So yeah, if you like this video, please give it a like. If you have any comments or want to add anything else to it, please do so. Leave comments down below. Join our Discord if you haven't, and check out the Patreon if you're interested. I do some research streams that people can join, and we can talk. And also, we're going to start having movie nights every month, and we have one coming up here shortly. Details on the Twitter. So anyway, thanks for watching. We'll talk later.